It's happening, people. We'll all have to make the switch someday in the sort of near future, the switch to electric cars. But even as more and more people have an electric car, there are still a lot of myths surrounding electric cars. Aren't they just as dirty? There aren't enough charging points. And you can't go on long trips with an electric car. Or can you? Are you ready for the myths about electric cars explained? Let's start with the myth that the power grid can't support the weight charging all those electric cars takes. A big argument people tend to bring up when they're opposed to switching to electric cars or electric vehicles is that our current power grid could never handle the weight that would be put on it by all those electrical cars. But did you know that compared to less than 20 years ago in the UK, for example, peak time electrical demand is actually 16% less? Washing machines, phones, computers, pretty much everything has become much more energy efficient. This has significantly reduced the amount of energy a household needs. In fact, estimates show that if we were to all switch out petrol and diesel vehicles for electrical ones overnight, there would still only be a 10% increase in pressure on the power system. The pressure on the power grid would still be lower than it was almost 20 years ago. So no need to worry about the power grid. Even if we'd all get an electric car right now, we're all good. Now, going cold turkey like that would naturally bring along some problems, which is why the transition period we're currently in is so important. This way, we're allowing ourselves to adjust where needed, and we get the time to understand charging patterns so we can plan ahead. Next, there aren't nearly enough public charging points. Are you sure? The funny thing about humans is that we don't always see what's right in front of us because we're not looking for it. If you're driving a petrol car right now, you won't be on the lookout for a charging point for electric cars, right? So it's possible you're simply unaware of how much the charging infrastructure has grown in the last few years. In the last year alone, the growth has been exponential. Each year, the number of public charging points increases. In some places, there are already more charging points than there are petrol stations. They're just a lot less noticeable than petrol stations. But most cars come with a special plug as well that would allow you to charge your car overnight while you're sleeping. This is a lot slower than just filling up your gas tank, but it saves you a trip to the gas station. But why would you charge your car at home when there are public places that allow you to do that for free? You'll still have to wait around, but you can work your plans around that. Do your groceries, visit the bookstore, get a coffee with a friend, and if you want the speed of a charge point from the comfort of your home, no problem. You can always have one installed right in front of your house. Try and do that with a petrol station. Following, aren't electric cars just as dirty as petrol or diesel cars? If you show someone a cropped picture of what the situation is between petrol, diesel cars, and electric cars, sure, they're not 100% got us there, but in order to truly compare the two, you have to look at the complete picture. And in order to do that, we look at something we call well-to-wheel emissions. This means you look at all the emissions, not just those of the cars. When talking about gasoline, emissions are produced while extracting the petroleum from the earth, refining it, transporting the resulting petrol to fuel stations, and only then does it get burned in the car. So to make it fair, we also have to consider all the emissions that are associated with the generation of the electricity that is needed to get an electrical car to drive, and calculate the conversion rate between electricity and kilometers for an electric car. Then, and only then, can you honestly say that you have the needed information with which you can say if it's indeed just as bad to drive an electrical car as it is a petrol or diesel car. And when you've done that, you'll learn that as of 2017, well-to-wheel production of carbon dioxide emissions was 211 grams per kilometer for petrol vehicles, 179 grams per kilometer for diesel vehicles, and just 73 grams for an electrical vehicle. If you add that to the equation that countries around the world are working on sustainable, renewable energy, and electric cars will only become less and less carbon intensive as the years go by. Stay tuned for more myths about electric cars and their explanations. Do you think the batteries of electric cars are wasteful because they can't be recycled, and that those batteries aren't made for long distances? Or is the price of an electric car what's holding you back? You really want to know what we've got in store in the next part of this video. First up, but you can't use electric cars on long trips. If you regularly take long trips with your car or like to have road trips, the distance an electric car can travel might be something that is holding you back from switching to an electric car after all the talk that's been about how much electric cars lack when it comes to range. Petrol and diesel cars can simply do more mileage, but unless your job revolves around driving lots of mileage every day, chances are almost 70% of the trips you make with your car are under 5 miles. And even if it's a little more than that, how many times a month do you truly take a long-distance trip that would bring you beyond what an electric car is capable of these days? And if you do go on a long long-distance trip, there are many more charging points than you're aware of if you're not in need of them. You'll need to take breaks anyway. There are ways to plan your charging moments and combine them with shopping, sightseeing, or stocking up on supplies. And again, lots of charging points are free. And then there are ways to make your battery last longer, like not weighing down the car more than needed and avoiding unnecessary high speeds. These days, almost all electric cars all come with a feature which is called regenerative braking, which tops up your battery as you slow down. So really, there are no excuses here. Next up, the batteries in electric cars are still wasteful. They can't be recycled. If you've dismantled the argument that electric cars emit just as much pollution as petrol and diesel vehicles, the next thing you might hear is that mining for resources is just as bad for the environment as burning fossil fuels is. But that's simply not the whole picture. For starters, the resulting battery isn't nearly as fragile as you might think, and it surely doesn't burn up like petrol and diesel does. And when the life of an electric car battery has run its course, that doesn't mean it gets thrown in a landfill either. It can be mined for its metals in special processing centers. The technology behind electric cars isn't stopping. Advancements will drive down the amount of lithium needed to make a new electric car battery, and the same will go for the cobalt and nickel. If all goes well in the next decade or so, most resources to make a new battery can come from recycled materials. But when the battery isn't mined, it can also be repurposed. There already are companies who specialize in giving those retired batteries a good old life, for example as storage for solar panels. Once you've burned up your gas tank, nothing is going to give you back that fuel, let alone repurpose it. Lastly, well, electric cars are way too expensive anyway. Buying a car is a huge investment for most people, and it's absolutely true that electric cars are, at the moment, more expensive than petrol and diesel cars. But what happens if you take a step back? After that initial cost, electricity is much cheaper than fossil fuels. And given how efficient electric cars are, they cost you a lot less per mile to drive, especially if you make use of regenerative braking and free charging points as much as you can. It wouldn't take long before the savings you make on fuel take owning an electric car more cost-effective than a petrol or diesel vehicle will ever be. Electric cars also have far less moving parts than a car that runs on fossil fuels, which means there are a lot less chances that something will need maintenance or break due to wear over time. An electric car doesn't need regular tune-ups or oil changes, and you don't have to worry about your electricity bill either if you're not able to make use of any free public charging points. The price of the electricity needed to charge an electric car is still significantly less than the price of filling your tank with petrol or diesel. So, in the long run, electric cars really are cheaper. Plus, the more prevalent electric cars become, the more affordable they're becoming as well. You should now have a good grasp on what the myths around electric cars are, and that they're just that, myths. Change isn't always fun and certainly not always good, but when it comes to electric cars, it really is the way forward. What are your thoughts on electric cars now? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching.